Well, I hope that I have demonstrated something about these questions, but let me begin with the second one, about how philosophy can be important for the sciences. There are many questions that arise in the fields of the sciences, especially with respect to the life sciences, that bear on issues of great human concern. So, for example, biologists may tell us all sorts of things about our tendencies to behave in particular ways, or they may tell us things about our genetic makeup, and it's very easy to conclude from that in a rather direct and perhaps simple way that certain kinds of options are not really available to us. That has happened many times, actually, in the history of biological science. People have claimed that we can't think of creating a society different from the one we have because there are biological constraints on what we can do. And some of my work has been devoted to trying to undermine that kind of quick and, I think, rather sloppy conclusion. I think biology is profoundly relevant to our understanding of ourselves and our societies, but that the simple deterministic recipes that are often put forward, you can't do this because biology sets a constraint, are completely inadequate. So I've spent a lot of time on that issue. More generally, I've tried to explore the ways in which various pieces of science are relevant to our human behavior and to the ways in which we live. It seems to me that philosophy can often clarify these things and also settle some of the disputes that arise within the sciences themselves. So that's one side of the question. The other side is, I think, that any serious understanding of human culture, of human societies, and in particular of human ethical life, how we live with one another, how we've got arrangements for organizing our behavior with respect to one another, the kinds of norms that we have, the kinds of laws that we set down, that all of this has a long history. It goes back into the deep past, and to really understand what is going on in this domain of our lives, we have to come to terms with that past. So an account that draws on human evolution, that studies the ways in which societies and human beings have evolved their cultures from whatever evidence we can gather, and some of it we can get from primatology, some of it from archaeology, some of it from anthropology, some of it from history, that all of this can shed light on the kinds of beings we are and the kinds of goals that we might aim at. So, for the last 15 to 20 years, I have been working on trying to understand what I call the ethical project. It seems to me that ethics has existed in human beings and in our societies for a very long time. It must go back about 50,000 years at the very least, because 30,000 years ago, humans were trading with one another, and for that they needed rules. And those rules must have been worked out within the small bands of human beings who were roaming around hunting for game and trying to forage for food. So trying to understand this history and put it together has led me to a view of how our ethical life might have evolved and how it might have made progress. So I think that science can be profoundly relevant to some of the deepest questions about human beings, about our nature, and about the ways in which we might set goals for our lives and for our societies. I had the opportunity in the 1990s to write a report for the Library of Congress on the Human Genome Project. And in the course of that, what I tried to do is understand the dangers of genetic knowledge, and also to try to understand how the genetic knowledge that has been, brilliantly worked out by scientists can be used for the human good. So it became clear to me that in the light of genetic knowledge that we get about human beings, the possibilities of diagnosing conditions in advance, there were obvious benefits. We could try to understand the nature of a particular disease, we could have better techniques for diagnosing diseases, but there were also dangers. We might start trying to create designer babies, individuals with particular conditions that we thought were particularly good, on the basis of trying to select for particular kinds of genetic makeups. So what I tried to do in a book that I wrote in the mid-1990s was to explain how we might steer our way through this difficult territory, how we might sort of separate the things that were genuinely good and useful and avoid lapsing into the old difficulties of eugenics and doing things that were profoundly ethically wrong. More recently, I've also been very interested in our ethical treatment of animals. And in that domain, I've focused in particular on the ways in which we try to ensure, we might try to ensure a humane environment for laboratory animals and avoid some of the horrors that have gone on in the past. So there are two ways in which I have tried to develop ethical questions that are relevant to biology. Well, a common view about science is, of course, that it aims at finding out the truth about the natural world, or in the case of the social sciences, about the human social world. But it's evident as soon as you think about it that there's far too much truth out there to be discovered. Scientists don't just ask for the truth in general. Most of the facts about the physical world are actually rather boring. I mean, there are all sorts of facts about temperatures in the environment in which we are right now. Nobody particularly wants to know that. What we want are answers to the interesting questions. But what is it that makes a scientific question interesting? It seems to me that the interesting and significant questions are the ones that bear, either directly or indirectly, on issues that affect how people live. So, for example, questions become interesting for biologists because, for example, they might lead to cures for diseases or ways of treating them. Now, not all interesting scientific questions have that kind of direct relevance to human life and human action. There are some questions that, as it were, are fundamental, bits of basic science. And one thing that we have learned again and again over the history of science is the importance of asking those kinds of questions. So I suggest a question is not simply significant if it has immediate practical payoff, it's also significant if we have reason to think that research along a particular line would lead eventually and cumulatively over time to solving some practical problem that affects us. So, for example, this is an example I often like to use, genetics in the early 20th century could have been developed directly with an assault on human diseases, and it would have gone nowhere. Instead, a small group of brilliant people here at Columbia, at my university, worked on the genetics of a fly, the fruit fly Drosophila melanogaster. And out of that came, over the course of decades and work on many, many other organisms, the kind of molecular medicine that has given us vaccines and diagnostic treatments and all kinds of good things today. So the route is often indirect. So I don't want to be seen as saying practical relevance is everything and it must be immediate, but rather, yes, of course we're interested in questions that bear on human concerns, but the road to answering those questions is often long and winding and slow. Well, I think our educational programs have gone badly awry these days. There is, of course, an enormous emphasis on particular kinds of disciplines, the so-called STEM disciplines, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. That effectively treats young people as if they need to be forced into productive disciplines so they can go forth and produce for the national wealth. But education is about something much more than that. It is, of course, properly aimed at helping young people be productive and enabling them to find ways of maintaining themselves, maintaining their lives over time. But that's not all there is to it. We should also be very interested in nurturing them and fostering them as citizens who can live and work together in a society. And we should also give them what John Stuart Mill called the only freedom that deserves the name, which is, he said, the ability to choose and pursue our own good in our own way. Mill was profoundly bothered by the fact, and it is a huge and dreadful fact, that most people who have ever lived have had the patterns of their lives thrust upon them. What he wanted is for people to work out who they are and what they aspire to be and what matters to them. And I think that's a very important thing for human beings, to be able to find your own way in life, to make your life your own. And for that, what you need is a deep understanding of all sorts of things, the sort of understanding that the humanities, literature, art, music, history, and cultural anthropology, and philosophy all supply. This is a crucial component of our education, and philosophical thinking is also relevant to the training of good citizens. So I think we have narrowed the vision of what education is and what it should be. And the title of the book I wrote about this comes from Ralph Waldo Emerson, great American thinker. The main enterprise of the world. The main enterprise of the world, says Emerson, is the upbuilding of a man. I would amend that, the upbuilding of a human being, but the point is right. Education is one of the most important things we do, and it's important because we build the lives that are to come.